Hello, this is Arnie Pedowitz. I'm an attorney in Midtown Manhattan, and today I'm going to talk to you about how you can help yourself / protect yourself in the workplace by use of this concept of reasonable accommodation. I had surgery, and my upper body strength isn't what it used to be. Chemo is making me feel lousy. I need breaks, and I can't come to work 5 days in a row like this. My employer is unhappy with the new me. Will I be fired? Should I be quitting? What should I do? Is there anything I can do? Help! That could be how you're feeling. That's how a lot of my clients feel, because they're at their wits' end and they don't know what to do. So this is where the law comes in. And while some say that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, I say that knowledge makes us strong. And while I'm going to give you some knowledge, it's to be used advisedly. You have to use your own sense of judgment as you're going along. So I can't make you a lawyer, but I can provide you with tips so that you can help yourselves. What I'm going to say now isn't easy and it's complicated, so please pay attention. And remember that if you need help as you're going along and trying to figure things out, speak to somebody who you feel can be helpful. Maybe it's somebody at the Cancer Advocacy Project and their contact information will be at the end. Maybe it's a lawyer, maybe it's your therapist, maybe it's a good friend who you feel is smart and will pay attention and give good advice. So let's get on with it. Cancer is a disability, and it's important for you to understand that you can't be fired because you have a disability, and you can't be treated differently because you have a disability. However, you can be fired if you can't do your job. So what does this mean for you? You're entitled to a reasonable accommodation to help you do the essential functions of a job. And what that means is you're supposed to be able to do what your job requires. And this concept is provided to you by law. New York State has the New York State Human Rights Law. New York City has the New York City Human Rights Law. On a federal perspective, there's the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it covers a lot of the same employers covered by the previous two laws. And then depending upon where you live in the state, there may be other local laws that will protect you. So what does this mean? The law requires that an employer give an employee who has a disability a reasonable accommodation so that she or he can do the essential functions of the job. Essential functions. It means the real tasks of the job. What do you have to do for your job? Not what are the attendant, less important functions that you do on a daily basis. For example, a word processor needs to be able to keyboard and type things into the computer. But maybe the person doesn't have to lift or file as part of the job. Maybe somebody else can do that. If you're a therapist, you need to be able to listen and talk, but maybe not to carry something that is very heavy. Maybe somebody else can take notes, or maybe note-taking can be done electronically so that you don't have to be doing it by hand, and that would be an accommodation. The New York State Human Rights Law defines a reasonable accommodation as meaning actions which, when the employer takes them, will permit the employee or the prospective employee to perform in a reasonable manner the activities involved in the job or occupation sought or held. So, is a reasonable accommodation required? And I've already told you, an employer is required to make a reasonable accommodation for a known disability of a qualified applicant or an employee with a disability. However, If making the accommodation would cause an undue hardship on the employer, that means like it would be very expensive or impractical, then the employer doesn't have to be given that accommodation. But maybe there's another accommodation that one can think of that wouldn't cause an undue hardship, and maybe it needs to be given. So, examples. Uh, Maybe giving somebody an aid to help lift or carry heavy items would be an accommodation. Giving somebody breaks during the day so that they're able to actually work the whole day would be an accommodation. A shortened work day or a shortened work week, or a work week that starts at a different time of day. Maybe someplace to lie down and rest, maybe an ergonomic chair. These are just different things that you can see that somebody with a disability might be able to do the work if they were given these aids in order to perform their functions. So it's really whatever helps you to do your job that doesn't cause an undue hardship for the employer. How do you get a reasonable accommodation? That's an important question because they don't just come out of the air. And here you have to be careful and again use your judgment because you're going to have to ask for it. And so in asking, remember that you want to be civil, calm, and not emotional. So it means you really have to prepare yourself for the ask. Who do you ask? Well, if the employer has a human resources department, go to them. You're going to them because hopefully they've been trained in this area. They know to keep your inquiry confidential, and hopefully they will be sensitive in talking with you. If there is no human resources department, or you're not confident in who they are, then you may have to ask your supervisor. And in doing so, remember you're confiding in your supervisor, and you're going to want to make mention of that you want the supervisor to keep this confidential because he or she may not know that they're supposed to, but the law requires that your request be kept confidential. So you just sort of mention it while you're speaking to the supervisor. You know, like, I need to talk to you about something, and I need or would like for you to keep this conversation confidential because I'm going to be talking about my health and I really don't want it communicated. In asking for a reasonable accommodation, you're asking for something that the employer should do for you. And the employer, your supervisor, human resources, are going to look at you and say, well, why should I take it on faith that what you're saying is what you need? So I recommend that you go into this conversation with a letter from your doctor or your therapist explaining why you need your request and saying what your request is. Your request is not just that you want an accommodation, because that doesn't give any guidance to the person you're talking to. Rather, before you're going in to make the request, you want to have planned this out ahead of time so that you can tell them what you want and what you need and why you need it. So you might say, I can't lift things and I need someone to do it. But then you would go further to say how you need somebody to lift things. Well, it's the filing, or it's carrying my laptop from my workstation to someplace else, uh, or it's bringing files from me to a meeting room, so that you're being very specific and giving them a sense of when it's needed. Uh, or you might need a break, and you might say, I'd like to have a break at 10:30 and at 3 o'clock for about 10 minutes each, because that'll give me a chance to recover and be ready. And your doctor's letter should indicate the very same thing. You want the doctor's letter to be specific because that again helps explain why the timing, why the kind of accommodation you're requesting is needed and how it'll be helpful. And your doctor sort of adds, or therapist adds additional weight to the request, meaning that somebody has thought about it. And this is not just you, but it's also your professional making the recommendation. Now, in communicating the request, you do not have to mention, and I recommend that you do not mention that it's because of your diagnosis of cancer or your treatment for cancer. And that's because we don't know how people react to the idea that you have cancer. And we don't want that to be a factor that's going on in their mind, which could later come back to bite you. So what you can say is, I have a serious medical condition and it needs an accommodation. And that's what your doctor should say as well, that they're treating you for a medical condition. Many of my clients who are going through the difficulties of chemo, radiation, surgery, the after effects, are having a hard time. They're anxious, they're unhappy. The world is now difficult for them. People aren't as sensitive as they would like. They've got all of their own anxieties. And it's important that you try to find a way to not let those feelings come out in the conversation. And you want to be respectful because you are asking for something. And you can't just assume that they're going to feel like they want to give you something. So you have to be prepared for the fact that they may give some resistance. And they may say that, look, that accommodation isn't reasonable. You may have to negotiate for what you want. So you'll say to them, well, this is what my doctor says, and I think I'm entitled to a reasonable accommodation. If you don't think it's going to work, can you tell me why? Or what do you think might work? Do you have a different suggestion for me other than what I've said? Or maybe you don't like the times that I've suggested for my breaks because they don't work for our particular, work day, or maybe they need to be flexible. So why don't we alter it to say, well, the first day on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, instead of 10:30, it'll be a 10 o'clock break, and instead of 3:30, it'll be a 3 o'clock break, or, mix and match. If they don't want to assign somebody to help lift and carry things for you, maybe you can ask for them to give you a little cart, and you can put what you need to in the cart and wheel it to wherever you have to go. Just examples. I didn't give you every example because each situation will be unique. But again, try to be specific with the request, try to have a backup, and don't fight with the employer, no matter how you may feel the employer is being provocative. So, you have to ask for the reasonable accommodation. And when you're asking for it, remember that, again, you want to get it, so you need to be ready. Why don't you want to talk about your cancer diagnosis? The reason is you don't know how somebody's going to react to it. Some people, may have had a member of the family with cancer and had a terrible time. And so if it's your supervisor you're speaking to, your supervisor may all of a sudden say, oh, they have cancer, they're not going to be able to perform, they're going to need all of this time off, and that won't work in the job situation. So we don't know how they're going to react, therefore you're trying to keep it from them. You do disclose it if you are confident that by disclosing it, you're going to get the result that you want. But remember, just because somebody had a problem in their family and they dealt with it, doesn't mean they're going to have empathy for you. It may mean that they're going to have these nightmares about how you're going to be at the workplace, and that's their own problem. But it's going to manifest on you if you let them know what they don't want to hear. So be careful and only disclose things if you have to. Reasons not to disclose your diagnosis are because you want to be fair to the employer, because you're an honest person and you like to disclose things, or you want them to be compassionate to you, or you feel they owe you, that you owe them an explanation. Look, I understand all of those feelings and how you want to be, But the reality is that we're now strategizing to get what you want. And I can't guarantee you that you're showing yourself to be fair or honest or seeking compassion or that you owe them anything is going to get you anything, and it might not. And so I prefer to be proactive and self-protective.